Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the future your doctor warned you about, the pills, the injections, the never-ending cycle of blood sugar spikes and crashes, might not be your future after all. Imagine discovering that the most powerful tool for improving, managing, and even reversing type 2 diabetes wasn't locked away in a pharmacy, but sitting right there in your kitchen the entire time. Because when we look at the science, really look at it, the research over the last century keeps pointing back to the same remarkable conclusion. Food isn't just fuel. Food is medicine. And in the case of type 2 diabetes, food may very well be the most effective medicine we've ever had. I'm Dr. Michael Greger, and today we're diving into one of the most exciting, empowering, and hopeful areas of modern nutrition science, how whole plant foods can help bring type 2 diabetes into remission. Not manage it better, not slow it down, but truly turn it around at the biological level. And yes, the research is clear. For too long, type 2 diabetes has been treated as an inevitable long-term condition, something that only gets worse over time. But that idea didn't come from biology, it came from tradition. Because when researchers started feeding people differently, when they started feeding people better, everything changed. Blood sugar levels dropped, insulin sensitivity improved, medications were reduced or discontinued, and in many cases, the disease process itself began to reverse. To understand why this happens, it helps to zoom out for a moment and look at what type 2 diabetes actually is. Most people think it's a disease of high blood sugar, but that's just the symptom. The real problem begins years earlier, inside the muscle and liver cells, when little droplets of fat called intramuscular lipids start to accumulate where they don't belong. These fat droplets interfere with insulin's ability to do its job, like gum in a lock. The pancreas tries to compensate by pumping out more and more insulin, but eventually the system becomes overwhelmed. Blood sugar rises, insulin resistance develops, and what began as a simple metabolic imbalance becomes a global public health crisis affecting hundreds of millions of people. Now here's the good news. While this process is incredibly common, it's also incredibly reversible if we address the root cause. And that's exactly what whole plant foods do. When you shift your diet away from animal fat and processed foods toward fiber-rich, antioxidant-packed, naturally low-fat plant foods, you start clearing out the excess fat inside your cells. Insulin sensitivity improves, sometimes dramatically, often within just days. And as the body becomes more responsive to insulin again, blood sugar levels fall, inflammation drops, and the entire metabolic landscape changes. This isn't a theory. This isn't wishful thinking. This is physiology. This is biochemistry. And it's been documented in clinical research for nearly a century. One of the earliest studies, all the way back in the 1930s, placed people with diabetes on a largely plant-based diet, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, and researchers watched as fasting blood sugars normalized in just under a week. That's not long-term lifestyle change. That's not years of perfect behavior. That's simply what happens inside the body when you stop fueling insulin resistance and start supporting insulin function. Jump forward to the 1970s when Dr. James Anderson, one of the pioneers in diabetes nutrition research, placed patients with type 2 diabetes on a high-fiber, whole-food, plant-based diet. What he found was astonishing. Nearly half of the patients were able to stop their insulin altogether, and the rest dramatically lowered their doses. In case after case, the same pattern emerged. As saturated fat dropped and fiber intake went up, the disease began to reverse. But what's most encouraging is that modern studies show the same thing, often even more powerfully. In randomized controlled trials comparing plant-based diets to conventional diabetes diets, diets that already follow standard medical guidelines, the plant-based groups almost always experience greater improvements in blood sugar, greater reductions in medication, greater weight loss, and greater improvements in cholesterol and blood pressure. And these changes happen even when plant-based participants are told to eat until satisfied, with no portion control and no calorie counting at all. Why? Because when you eat whole plant foods, you're not just eating food, you're eating a nutritional package designed by nature to optimize human health. You're eating fiber, something 97% of Americans don't get enough of. Fiber acts like a sponge, slowing the release of sugar into the bloodstream while feeding beneficial gut bacteria that help regulate glucose metabolism. You're eating phytonutrients, powerful plant compounds that modulate inflammation, support insulin signaling, and protect beta cells in the pancreas. You're eating water-rich, low-calorie foods that help you naturally reach a healthier weight without deprivation. And you're dramatically reducing saturated fat, the main dietary driver of insulin resistance. Now, people often ask, does reversing type 2 diabetes require extreme dieting, complicated meal plans, expensive ingredients? Fortunately, the research says no. Some of the most effective anti-diabetic foods are the most accessible and affordable. Beans, lentils, barley, oats, greens, berries, sweet potatoes, fruits, whole grains. The foods our ancestors thrived on for thousands of years. Take beans, for example. Beans are sort of the metabolic superheroes of the plant kingdom. In study after study, meals containing beans lead to lower blood sugar responses, not only at the time of the meal, but even hours later. That means if you eat chickpeas for lunch, your dinner blood sugar may be lower because of something called the second meal effect. Your body becomes more insulin sensitive across the entire day. Or think about leafy greens. Just one serving a day is associated with significantly reduced risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Greens are low in calories, high in nutrients, and packed with compounds like nitrate and magnesium that help muscles absorb glucose more effectively. It's like giving your cells a tune-up. Berries are another star player. You can give someone a large sugary meal and add berries to the meal, and the blood sugar spike will be significantly lower. That's because berries alter carbohydrate absorption, slow digestion, and improve insulin sensitivity. And these effects happen quickly, sometimes within hours. Whole grains tell a similar story. People often assume that because grains contain carbohydrates, they must raise blood sugar. But whole grains, intact grains, behave very differently from the processed white flour products most people are used to. Barley, oats, quinoa, brown rice, these foods increase the gut's production of short-chain fatty acids, which help regulate glucose metabolism and improve insulin sensitivity. In fact, some intact whole grains can lower blood sugar more effectively than some medications. And then there's the power of weight loss. While diet quality matters enormously, and plant-based diets improve insulin sensitivity even independent of weight loss, shedding excess fat around the liver and pancreas can dramatically increase the odds of remission. This is where whole plant foods shine. They're naturally lower in calorie density, meaning you can eat generous, satisfying portions while still moving toward a healthy weight. No hunger, no restriction, no feeling punished, just natural, sustainable change. But perhaps the most hopeful part of all is that reversal can happen faster than most people realize. In carefully controlled trials, insulin sensitivity begins improving within the first week of dietary change. Liver fat begins melting away, pancreatic function begins recovering. By 12 weeks, many participants reduce or eliminate diabetes medications entirely. By 6 months or 1 year, remission rates can be as high as 60% or more, without surgery, without extreme dieting, and without side effects. Of course, not everyone's body responds the same way, and remission is never guaranteed. Factors like how long a person has had diabetes, how much pancreatic function remains, genetics, and lifestyle patterns all play a role. But the point is this: for the vast majority of people with type 2 diabetes, the disease is not a one-way street. It is not a lifelong sentence. It is not destiny. And the idea that nothing can be done beyond medication simply isn't what the science shows. Now, you might be thinking, if it's really this effective, why isn't everyone doing it? Part of the reason is that old ideas take time to change. For decades, we focused on carbohydrate restriction instead of fat reduction. But restricting carbs doesn't treat insulin resistance. It just hides the symptoms. It's like covering up a warning light on your dashboard. When you avoid carbohydrates, your blood sugar looks better, but you haven't addressed the underlying metabolic dysfunction. And as soon as carbs return to the diet, blood sugar spikes back up because insulin resistance is still there. With whole plant foods, you address the cause. You improve insulin sensitivity so your body can handle carbohydrates normally again. You repair the system rather than working around the broken parts. Another reason plant-based diets work so well is that they're not just treating diabetes, they're improving overall health. Type 2 diabetes is often accompanied by high blood pressure, high cholesterol, inflammation, and elevated risk of heart disease. But plant-based diets reduce all of these simultaneously. It's like using one intervention to target multiple conditions at once. Some people start eating plant-based for diabetes and end up improving their heart health. Others come for the weight loss and end up improving their glucose metabolism. The body doesn't divide itself into separate departments. Everything is connected. The beauty of using food as medicine is that you're not just improving numbers, you're improving life. More energy, better sleep, clearer thinking, better digestion, less joint pain, and a sense of empowerment that comes from knowing you're actively reshaping your future. Now, if you're wondering what a diabetes-reversing day of eating might look like, the answer is surprisingly simple. Breakfast could be a bowl of steel-cut oats topped with berries and flax seeds. Lunch might be a hearty lentil stew or bean chili with leafy greens on the side. Dinner could be a plate of steamed greens, roasted sweet potatoes, and a stir-fry with tofu, brown rice, and vegetables. Snacks? Fruit, carrots, and hummus. A handful of nuts. It doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be whole, plant, and minimally processed. Even small changes make a difference. Swap white rice for brown rice. Replace sugary beverages with water or green tea. Add a serving of beans to lunch. Pile more greens on your dinner plate. The body responds remarkably fast, and the more you move in this direction, the more benefits you see. One of the most incredible things about the research is that the benefits aren't limited to adults. In some studies, even people with long-standing type 2 diabetes, 10, 15, 20 years, still saw improvements. That tells us that the body has an extraordinary capacity for healing, even after years of metabolic dysfunction. And it's not just laboratory studies or clinical trials. Around the world, populations eating traditional plant-rich diets, places like rural Japan, parts of Africa, and the blue zones, have historically had some of the lowest rates of type 2 diabetes on the planet. When those populations adopted Western eating patterns, diabetes skyrocketed. When researchers encouraged people to return to whole plant foods, rates plummeted. The pattern is consistent, predictable, and reproducible across cultures, continents, and generations. So when we say the research is clear, we're not talking about one study or one researcher or one moment in scientific history. We're talking about 100 years of converging evidence from metabolic ward studies, clinical trials, epidemiology, population research, and real-world results. And the message is unmistakable. Your plate is one of the most powerful tools you have for improving and even reversing type 2 diabetes. And the best part? It's never too late to start. Whether you're 25 or 75, whether you're newly diagnosed or have been living with diabetes for years, whether you're on medication or not, the body is remarkably responsive to dietary change. So if you're watching this and thinking, I don't know if I can do it, I want you to know this. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to overhaul your entire life overnight. You just have to take the next step, and then the next step, and then the next. because every step you take toward whole plant foods is a step toward better health, better energy, better blood sugar control, and a better future. Food is powerful. Food is healing, and in the case of type 2 diabetes, the right foods can help you rewrite your story. If you found this information helpful, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more evidence-based nutrition content, and check out the other videos on the channel to keep learning how to use the power of food to transform your health. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.